Oh, the last thing I wanted to do... Actually, I'm going to leave that all. I was originally thinking I wanted to kind of get a... Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm calling an audible. I'm just going to grab a couple of my colors here, right on the brush, just to get myself a nice dark color. And just lay in some shapes here that I can use as a reference when I do this background, it's going to really cover stuff up. And it'll even cover all of this, but I at least want to maybe have some reference to where I wanted this ship to be. And it's just going straight onto the... dry illustration board. Alrighty. Going. Alright, so for the background here, I really just kind of want to get some color down, and that is actually that little dust bit right in the middle. The sooner I get rid of this white of the paper, the better. So I'm just getting a nice thin layer of this kind of lavender or purple on here. So you can see, if you really want to, this casein can work just like a, you can work it like watercolor. You just thin it down and it goes on pretty much. You could do an entire watercolor painting with this stuff. Not that you'd want to. If you had some fine watercolors, it'd probably be the best solution entirely. Excellent. Let's see here. Now, getting right in here to the, pardon me, I think I'm going to end up dropping a sleeve right into the middle of this if I'm not careful. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit of a darker color here for this. We're going to have, I'm thinking in my mind some of the famous Hubble shots, and I just want to dot in, I want sort of an arm of cloud work here that's sticking right up in the middle of this. So I'm getting a little bit of a darker, going right back into my violet here to get a darker piece of it there. And the stage right now, I just want to get some of my shapes in. I want to kind of know where I'm going with this thing. It doesn't really matter what the shapes are necessarily. We will refine them as we go. Let's get a little bit more water in there. And here I'm using this a little bit more, a little thicker, a little less of the water in it. The board will actually hold up pretty well to some scrubbing with the brush, but you can't do too much because it starts to fray a little bit, and you just kind of work it too hard, and it's just no good. Alrighty. This to be right down here, darken this corner a little bit. I did some tests with these paints, and it's pretty funny. It ends up looking a lot darker and more purple on camera than it does in reality. So it's a very, very interesting to see how this goes. Alrighty, I want this little here. And I'm a little frightened about what's going to happen once I add this teal, but full disclosure, I've been looking at a lot of an artist named John Harris. He's a British artist, and he does a lot of very fantastic, just dreamlike nebula backgrounds. brush, effectively. So it goes on. Most colors are opaque. Some are actually semi-opaque, but it dries very fast. So there's not a lot of working time between the colors. So basically what I'm putting down right here is probably what I'm going to end up with. But I wanted to get some nice feathered bits in between here, and I'm doing it just with this gigantic brush. Let's see, there we go. So when I go do lay in some details later, we will have some light and dark to work with. Oops. New brush. I think in some later shows I will switch over to some other paints. The nice thing about this one is it's actually very good at doing the spaceship part. It's a little bit fiddly for doing, you know, kind of these fantastically. A background like this, I'd rather do an acrylic or oil, to be perfectly honest. But it does work out pretty well for that. And I'm a little bit. I feel like I've just got this monster thing in the background here, so I'm going to kind of adjust this a little bit. My one cloud isn't kind of being the one cloud I was hoping to be, so I'm kind of going to work this in a little differently. There we go. When this paint dries, it changes color a little bit, which is similar to how acrylics work. In some cases, the color shift is pretty drastic, so I want to be just a little bit careful. Anyway, whereas I've actually did a painting where I laid down acrylics as a ground, did a background scene for it, and then did the casein on top of it, and it actually worked out pretty well. Okay. Boy, my apologies for the glare on this. That's just really crazy. There we go. Alrighty. And I'm actually going to switch up to a thinner brush, a smaller brush for this, since I want to get some details in on this ship. This one's good. It still has a blue tone to it, but I think that's okay, because we've kind of got a blue-toned bit here, and when I actually start getting into the details, we are actually going to introduce some yellows and oranges with the ship hull. Not bright orange, but it's going to make a difference once we kind of get those in. So let me just kind of start working out a shape for this gigantic ship that happens to be traveling into this mysterious nebula. This all to be, here we go. Kind of think we're looking at the back end, at the business end of the ship here a little bit, so kind of going to have this to be sort of shrouded. All the drives will be hidden back in here. A little bit more of that. There we go. Yep, that was the key. A little bit more umber. There we are. And I'm kind of just doing dark on dark. It's not very exciting at this point, but we're building up. We're building up drama. The nice thing about Casein, you can do light over dark, which is where it gets to be pretty exciting. It's sort of a crazy tower up here, and every time I'm trying to keep in my mind, keep an idea of where their perspective is occurring, and to me, it's just sort of it doesn't come naturally. It's taken years and years to get me to a point where I can remember how to do this, but just the exercise of having drawn the lines of the first part have left it in me, so I know what left the impression of it with me. So I'm kind of trying to keep that in here. This is a very large ship, so we're gonna have details that we can dot in as we go. There we are. Oops. Give it some more structures up here to the front. Yeah, my mixture ended up being a little bit too teal, blue, greeny for my taste. So I'm gonna keep adding some things to it. Alrighty. And I'm not gonna worry too much about whether this looks kind of scrimbly here. We'll refine this with some detail later. I'm just letting the texture of the brush run right off in different corners. Some of this I can't really freeform in here until I get some lighter colors in, but it makes me feel better to do it right now. All right. I've got an area that I kind of want to see some really huge Starship drive engines hidden in behind the cowl of the rest of the ship. So I'm going to just kind of paint around this and see if I can get some hull panels in here. The light is going to be coming sort of off the scene itself. Even though we've got some light coming from behind the nebulas, there's probably going to be a light source off the scene that we're not going to necessarily show. But it's, in my mind, it's going to be coming in from the top right. So all of the surfaces to the top right will have some little detail on here. Yeah, let's see, how bright is that? That's pretty bright. I think I'd like to darken that up a little bit more. There we go. And I'm just going to keep turning this because it's more comfortable to where I'm sitting, and I'll try to remember to bring it back. Yeah, there we go. I didn't want to go quite that dark yet, or quite that bright yet. So just want to dance in some surfaces here. There we go. Oops. Go figure on the top part. It is already that light. And this is really just sort of freeform. Like I said, haven't really given this too much thought of the design of the ship, so I didn't plan it out. I didn't draft it. If I were working in Hollywood, some art director would be coming in and going, "What are you doing? Give me an actual drawing." Not in any danger of that here, though. I'm just going to use the flat of my brush to define the edges here a bit. As we go, I'm leaving gaps where we can put in some real interesting fun stuff later, because that's always exciting. And I'm feeling like the color's too uniform, so I'm adding a little bit of yellow ochre to the mix, just on the brush as I go, to maybe give it these surfaces that are sort of rolled underneath a little different character than the top. Maybe we've got a warmer colored light source down below here. And I'll have just a couple, that same yellow tone kind of come in and up here. There we go. Well, I've got my dark. I'm going to come in and I'm just going to keep pushing and pulling some darks and lights here as I go, and it's, there we go. And with the same brush, I want to get in and re-highlight some of these areas. With the lighter color that I mixed up earlier, that I probably should, I was going to start with and then just didn't, but that's quite all right. I still want to keep a flat. There we go. And some brushes that I use are pretty fancy, and some other ones are really inexpensive. So this one's nothing. This one's one of the nothing fancy. Don't write home to it, but it's aged to a point where I've gotten used to the shape, and I really kind of dig it, especially for doing the smaller stuff. So it's currently in my list, my rotation of trusted but old busted. There we go. Now I'm just kind of trying to lighten up some of these panels on the top, and as I go, I'm trying to indicate some structure, but the background is still brighter than anything on this ship, so it's basically the ship itself is fighting for attention in the overall scheme of things, but that's okay. I'm working this way up, working my way up to brighter colors. Brighter tones, I should say, not colors necessarily, since I'm kind of dealing with the same teals. Here we go. Some of these down here will have some reflection of this light. We'll have some off on this boom arm over here, some things that might actually have, might be receiving some of that light from above. I think I want that to be a little bit longer. There we go. And I have no idea what the things are coming off the front, but they're just going to be there for fun, so what the heck. Alright. Wash the brush off, and now I'm going to kind of do the same thing with my darker color. Whoop, didn't wash it off enough, still had too much light in it. Now I kind of want to break up some of these surfaces with a few details. Trying to stick with the shape itself. See if I can't help define what's going on with it here. struggling just a bit with the consistency of the paint because what's on my palette is getting is getting too thick and muddy, and when I wet it down, it gets to be too thin. So, you know, these are the challenges we must all face. There we go. I think I'm just going to try a little bit of water on there. There we go. Want to go too heavy with the water? And usually if I'm painting something that is this detailed, this is pretty small. So it's actually, it works in your favor to work on a much larger surface, and maybe on a future video I will do a much larger painting so you can kind of get into these details a bit more, since they can be so much fun. But in theory, yes, you can go with smaller brushes, but you run into another problem, is the physics of the paint itself. I mean, there's a certain sticky, liquidy quality to every paint, and you can adjust it with mediums and water to your heart's content. But the reality is, at different scales, the paint's going to do slightly different things, and it's going to be easier to manipulate with a larger brush, maybe larger quantity of paint. Something like this, I mean, this is, I don't intend this to be a finished piece that stays in someone's home necessarily, unless you want it, of course, in which case it'll be available in my store. But it certainly isn't going to be something that is a architectural piece. It's really just a mood piece, if you will. So impressionistic spacecraft. And I'm just kind of following the shapes as I see them through here and seeing where I can add and define detail on a dark pass. And this to me is where all the fun kind of comes in, at least on the spaceships themselves. It's kind of getting in all these fine details just with. And it's a lot like just building up structures. I was thinking these are all, in my mind, I'm imagining that these things all have panels to them and other supports and such. Is that actually, there's a piece right here in the middle that I think might have been painted. Yeah. There we go. And this one in particular has more of a John Harris thing going on to it than a Berkey. Although, kind of the same school of ship illustration, if you will. So I think I'm going to go ahead and break out the black, because I want a few areas of this ship to be dark enough so that it really punches the contrast forward, and I'm going to go sparingly. So I'm going to add a little bit of black to the board here. There we go. I really don't want to go too crazy with this. In fact, I still have some of my, I might actually mix in some of my other gray, so it's not 100% black. A lot of times when you go with straight black onto a painting that has been done up in a color scheme like this, it'll really just rip the eye away a little bit too much, and I don't want to do that. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it is just significantly darker than the rest of the lights and darks in the paintings, and that can be distracting. But two, blacks have a color to them, and if that color isn't represented in your painting anywhere else, it will be perceived, it'll just be garish. But I do like the idea of darkening up the inside of those engines there. That does seem to help it out quite a bit. I'm going to just reset the music there. And I will change up the soundtrack at some point, but I absolutely love this. So I'm just going to keep this rolling for right now. There we go. Trying to define the outside edges of this and is black. The white does the same thing. It almost goes on like ink when you get it really wet, and it will just cover everything. But this is going to add a lot of the... there we go. Yeah, I feel like that's maybe what some of this was missing. I get a bit of this in here. It may not show up on the camera as well, but this is definitely punching out the darks. I got that so thin it was almost going on as a black wash. Alright, so since I went dark with some blacks on here, now I'm mixing up some of my white, or getting some of my white prep so I can work in some very small highlights. In fact, I think I'm going to trade out my brush again for a small round. Nope, I take that back. Making a last minute call. Making an audible. Alright. That's where it gets to be kind of fun. This white is going to just... if you're not careful, it'll take over everything. I just want to dance this off on the surfaces that need the biggest highlights. There we go. And that's really starting to bring this thing up. There we go. Really starting to make it pop off that off the page and off the background a bit. But yes, the back to the British shows. I think the British model makers in particular for those shows, Brian Johnson and Derek Meddings, Martin Bauer, for instance, those guys ruined my little brain. I loved their model work. To this day, it's some of my favorite stuff in the world. And I really think in a lot of cases, even though you can look at the shows now and see that they were technically done with far older equipment, and they didn't have the digital production, of course, but I think a model looks fantastic. Even to this day, even though you can look at it and go, that's just a model, it looks amazing. So the important thing here in this stage is just getting in hints of stuff without covering up too much. It'll hint at detail that may not necessarily be there. And if you accidentally hit some corners you didn't want to, it might actually indicate detail where you didn't want it to be, but that's quite all right. It's happy accidents, right? Alrighty. Yeah, I think it's working well. I have a little bit of the highlights on the other side on these panels up here, since the light's kind of coming in from above. I kind of like that. It silhouettes it a little bit. So I'm going to kind of hint that in. There we go. I went really deep on the behind the scenes of those movies. Trying to sort of add another layer of lightness to some of the end bits of this engine here, just to make it pop off a bit. Well, I don't want it to get too bright. I don't want it to actually be... Yeah, it's now starting to fight a little bit with the outside bit, so maybe that's a bit of a mistake. Tone that back down just a bit. Well, I'm 100% happy with where I was going with the spaceship. Not so sure about the background, but that's perfectly all right. I'm going to let the spaceship set up a little bit, and I'm going to grab a round... Here we go. Yeah, it was the era of movie magazines, David. We didn't have the internet, so it was Starlog, Cinefantastique. That was one that used to come out. Fantastic Films. Yeah, that was a happy time. All right, now I just want to kind of get in and see. I'm going to add a few stars here just to see what I need to do with this background, because adding the stars to it, it won't fix it. Adding stars won't fix the background, but it's funny what happens when you start putting them in. It actually gives it a finish that maybe you didn't think it would have, and maybe it's okay as it is. I don't feel like I want to go back in and completely mess with the background any further. I think for this particular painting, I just want to let it be the smudge fest that it is. I'm not disappointed. All right, so typically if you want to do stars, the easy way is to just throw them on with a brush, but they end up being kind of small, and I'm going to let those happen, so I'm pretty happy with how that happened. And on my bigger painting, I'm just going to use this card to cover up my spaceship, because I don't want to have stars on the spaceship, and grab some of this white paint that was pretty thin down, and just going to throw some stars. Throw a lot of stars. Move that back up. It's a good way to get paint on your hands too, which you always wanted to do. But yeah, I'm okay with the idea that the sets and the models from 2001 were destroyed. It's unfortunate. and I would like to have seen some of them in a museum. But there we go. Get some of those on there. Alrighty. But I'm actually glad that they didn't end up in some really bad shows. that would have been even more depressing to me. Sorry, Roger. So now I'm gonna go for the. We're gonna peel off the paper, the tape. I always tape off the edges on these paintings just to kind of keep them a little clean here. Just low tack masking tape. There we go. Alrighty. And, you know, it's actually not as bad as I thought. I was getting a little concerned about the background, but now that I'm kind of seeing it in context with the rest of it, I'm actually rather liking that. I'm looking off camera here to take a look at it too. So the last thing, a very important bit, is of course, we're going to have a little color here, a little color there. Do a little, oop. I always keep, the little card is just for me to dab off paint and see how badly I'm doing here before committing to the main page. So let me just see what I'm doing. There we go. And there we go. Thank you for watching.